homage to the root teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to the wisdom warrior, Manjushri, homage to all the benevolent lineage masters. The Supreme Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in millions of kalpas. Now we are able to hear, study, and follow it. May we fully realize the Tathagata's true meaning. In order to liberate all sentient beings from samsara, please generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let's continue the teaching. There are several faults that can arise when we listen to the Dharma, namely the defilements of the Dharma vessel. Now we'll talk about the 6 stains. The first 3 have been discussed: arrogance, lack of faith, and not seeking the Dharma. These 3 faults have already been covered. Today we begin with the 4th, outward distraction. When consciousness becomes engrossed in the objects of the 6 senses, that's the very root of all the afflictions of samsara and the source of all suffering. As you know, our consciousness is often distracted by external things, such as sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and ideas known as the 6 dusts. This kind of distraction is the root cause of samsara. Since beginningless time, immeasurable sentient beings have remained trapped in the deep abyss of samsara, unable to free themselves. Why is that? What is the main reason? It's because our consciousness hasn't achieved freedom. Also, we're constantly attached to the 5 sensory pleasures: forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and touch. Once attached to them, we create all kinds of karma, and that's how we sink into the mire of samsara. Therefore, the root of all confusion and obsession is our clinging and attachment. The source of all suffering in this world is also our greed and attachment. So whether we're hearing the Dharma or practicing it, it's essential that we use every method we can to purify our minds. In the beginning, no matter what practice we do, it's difficult to observe our mind. Padmasambhava mentioned in the 6 bardos that when we first begin to observe our minds, the mind appears to be in constant flux, never still, not even for a moment. As a result, we become frustrated and self-critical. How come my mind is so difficult to control? But in fact, this isn't the case. It's simply because sentient beings have never observed their own minds before. It's only now, when we observe the mind, that we discover that our mind is very agitated by attachments and thoughts. At that very moment, don't give in to frustration. Instead, keep applying antidotes, working steadily against all the conceptual afflictions that arise. So whether we're listening to the Dharma teachings or engaging in any virtuous activities, our minds must remain focused and not distracted outwardly. If the mind is drawn away to external objects, it's very difficult for us to grasp the meaning of the Dharma. For example, some people listen to teachings while working or doing other things, which of course makes it a lot harder to gain true benefit from the Dharma, because our capacity to absorb things is limited. We can only take in so much at one time. For ordinary people, focusing on one thing at a time would yield a relatively higher success rate. So when we listen to the Dharma, we should try our best to make sure chores and errands are done. Once they're out of the way, then make the most of that time to listen to the Dharma with full attention. We must not be distracted by external sounds or let our eyes wander to other things. Our thoughts are endlessly tangled, one leading to another without pause. When the mind is in such a state, the true Dharma simply can't sink into our hearts. So every practitioner must stay fully focused when listening to the Dharma, because during that time, every effort should be dedicated to that one thing. That being the case, it's unnecessary to add more tasks to dilute your attention. We shouldn't multitask. It's only those with great wisdom and high faculties who can do so. Some people say, I can do other things while listening to the Dharma. This is my strong suit, and I'm capable of multitasking. But in reality, this is very difficult. An ordinary person only has one thought at a time. So it's unlikely that you can actually focus on doing one thing while your thoughts are on another. It would work if you had 2 minds, but that's impossible according to Buddhist logic. Non-conceptual awareness can register multiple objects simultaneously, but conceptual thought operates one at a time. One being has only one mind. If your mind is occupied with beautiful forms, pleasing sounds, or delicious tastes, you simply don't have a second mind available to listen to and absorb the Dharma at the same time. This is absolutely impossible. Hence, during the process of listening to the Dharma, the one and only mind that you have must be focused on it. Of course, I've noticed that since the teacher is present, most people can remain focused on the Dharma, except for a few rare moments. Many people can do this with ease here. But when you meditate or engage in contemplation practice or any specific practice, your mind is easily distracted outwards, or has deluded thoughts about past or future mundane matters. These are very common. Therefore, during our focused practice, we should also constantly guard our mind with mindfulness and vigilance. When we listen to the Dharma, we must check our conduct and restrain our sixth sense faculties from engaging with the external world to the greatest extent possible. For example, it's simply not possible to listen to and absorb a Dharma transmission through online recordings or audio teachings while your eyes are watching television at the same time. I don't think it's possible that your ears are paying attention to the Dharma transmission, while your eyes are glued to the worldly images from the television. I've seen some lay practitioners make a genuine effort to do this, but in reality, it's unlikely they'll succeed completely. So, we suggest that when listening to the Dharma, you should try your best to first finish all trivial matters and make the time and space to listen with full attention. During that time, it's best not to have any disturbances from others, so that your Dharma practice can be complete. Whether from the perspective of transmission or learning, you'll obtain the true benefits of the Dharma, as discussed here. For example, when we listen to or practice the Dharma, if the mind wanders to external object, there are many faults. Here, the text speaks of the five sense consciousnesses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body attaching to external objects. Now, strictly speaking, from the perspective of Buddhist logic, these five sense consciousnesses don't themselves generate conceptual thoughts or attachments. Rather, it's through them that conceptual thoughts arise. But the text here isn't making that fine distinction. From a worldly perspective, there's a saying, "My eye consciousness clings to external beauty. My ear consciousness clings to pleasing sounds." So from an everyday perspective, and without diving too deep into philosophical analysis, we can accept this way of looking at it. In the following text, the faults of our five sense consciousnesses attaching to external objects are explained with analogies. For example, due to the eye consciousness clinging to form, the moth flies into the flames, resulting in its self-destruction. From the perspective of eye consciousness, because beings' eyes perceive external beauty and forms, the mind begins to cling and generate greed towards what is desirable. When we see an especially beautiful object, we begin to grasp onto it. As we cling, eventually, we get caught deeper into samsara and can't attain liberation. Because of their excessive attachment to beautiful things, many sentient beings fail to be reborn in the higher realms after death. Instead, they fall into the animal realm, some even becoming moths. As for the moths, when they see the glow of a flame in the night, they desperately fly into it, which eventually leads to their own destruction. Of course, nowadays, some scientists and their explanations suggest that moths have an instinctive behavior similar to celestial navigation. Or some say they have a phototaxis, that's a tendency to move toward light. But all these explanations arise because they don't acknowledge past and future lives, and hence don't understand the habitual tendencies from past lives. In truth, those who are especially attached to beauty and attractive forms in this life will definitely be reborn in the animal realm in the next life. There was once a Khenpo teaching the Dharma in a city. He advised the audience not to be overly fond of dressing up, or else they might take the rebirth as moths. I heard that after this Khenpo finished his teaching, quite a number of people in the audience no longer dared to dress up. Indeed, in secular life, people think about looking good every day. Over time, this constant preoccupation breeds more and more greed in the heart. Such tendencies will manifest in the next life as well. Due to the ear consciousness clinging to sounds, wild animals are killed by hunters' guns. Worldly people are sometimes also attached to pleasing sounds, and the resulting misfortune can be disastrous and endless. As mentioned earlier, wild animals such as deer and musk deer are particularly captivated by the sound of the pipa, a Chinese lute. That even if poisonous arrows are shot into their flesh, they won't be aware of it, and eventually die under the hunter's weapon. Similarly, when listening to or practicing the Dharma, we should try our best to avoid being distracted by these external factors. A sound only reaches our ears. Beyond that, it has no real substance. Some beings, however, carry deeply ingrained habits from past lives, and these can be terrifying in their power. If one fails to be born as a human, it's very likely that one will be an animal, clinging to music, sometimes around musical instruments. We see cockroaches or mice, and perhaps they were famous musicians in past lives. They failed to obtain a human form in this life and now guard these instruments. It's quite possible. I once mentioned that at Kumbum Monastery, there was a very famous master named Lama Jamyang Sheba. He once performed liberation rites for a famous singer. The Lama chanted the practice of consciousness transference from dawn all the way to dusk. Yet the look on his face showed something was clearly wrong. Later in the afternoon, he began to sing local songs for a long time. After singing, he chanted a supplication for taking rebirth and performed dedications to conclude. At the time, everyone was puzzled, wondering why the master paused the ritual and sang worldly songs. Later, some disciples asked the master about this situation, and the master said, "Today, I observed through my clairvoyance that the deceased was deeply attached to singing when she was alive. Even now, in the intermediate state, her consciousness keeps clinging to others' singing." He continued, "No matter how I tried to summon her through the Dharma, her consciousness simply wouldn't come. So I had no choice but to sing in order to draw her near." People all heard and said Lama Jamyang Sheba had a beautiful voice. During his singing, her Bardo consciousness became slightly drawn to his voice. At that time, the master said, "I visualized my consciousness as one with hers in the intermediate state, and after chanting the supplication for rebirth in the Pure Land, I was able to liberate her." As I've said before, some people are particularly fond of listening to songs and music when alive. I know a fellow practitioner, a Vajra companion of mine, who, every day around noon, would listen to an old radio while stir-frying Chinese cabbage for lunch. I had the impression that perhaps he had special hearing faculties, because what he was listening to wasn't actually pleasant, but he seemed to think it was great. Every day around noon, the combination of tasty food and those sounds perhaps did his body some good. Each sentient being has different ideas and inclinations, but when we're listening to or practicing the Dharma, there's no need for music or instruments. However, nowadays some people have the idea that when attending a lecture, there should be some soft music to evoke a sense of joy and happiness, not loud, of course. During the lecture, there should be some background music, perhaps the sound of a soft guzheng, a Chinese zither, so on and so forth. But if your mind is truly focused and absorbed by the Dharma, then you don't need all kinds of worldly music. Therefore, these ideas aren't necessarily reasonable. Now we're discussing sound, and we can say that being attached to music can lead to such faults. Due to the nose consciousness clinging to fragrances, bees become trapped and die among the flowers. Sometimes people in this world are quite attached to pleasant fragrances through their sense of smell, which can lead to real problems. Nowadays, many people are particularly fond of pleasant scents, and they go to great lengths to wear all kinds of perfumes. Sometimes, when these people pass by, Others may act surprised and have to stop and look back because a wave of fragrance washes over them. At that moment, these people would feel quite special. Yesterday, a Dharma friend from overseas came and said, "Guru, I'm sorry that I'm wearing perfume with a special fragrance." I said, "No need to apologize for a good fragrance. You should be thanked. If one is particularly fond of it and applies it every day, on the body, on clothes, while some people nearby might feel very comfortable, others may feel differently. Just like bees, which are particularly fond of good smells and fragrances, they end up trapped and dying among the flowers. In the past, when we talked about the text, The Lotus Gardens Play, we mentioned this story of Dayang and Aning. Dayang was a golden bee, and Aning was a jade bee, and Aning eventually died inside the flower petals. A brief word about the history of this text. It's relevant. Patrul Rinpoche turned the love story of these two bees into an excellent play, in which the Dharma was expounded through the story. I remember that His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok also mentioned the preliminary practices when he gave this teaching. At that time, His Holiness had already finished teaching the heart essence of the Guru. It was on April 16th, 2001, when he completed it. Then he met Mipham Rinpoche in a dream. Mipham Rinpoche then told him, "Now that you've finished teaching the heart essence of the Guru, you should teach the Dzogchen preliminary practices, the words of my perfect teacher." At that time, His Holiness said, "Given my unfavorable health conditions and various external factors, I wonder if I can complete such a long text." Later, His Holiness asked again, "May I teach the revealing the path to liberation or the preliminary practices in the Lotus Gardens Play?" Mipham Rinpoche later agreed. After he agreed, His Holiness vowed to teach it 100,000 times. The next day, His Holiness said in class, "In this brief life of mine, I may not be able to complete it 100,000 times. I request each and every one of the Khenpos and Dharma teachers here to teach it. If there are 100,000 people who listen to my teaching, then my vow should be fulfilled." To fulfill his wish, I later also taught it once in class. The teachings from that time might be included in the Treasury of Sublime Dharma book series. His Holiness completed teaching the Sutra on the Wise and Foolish and the Words of My Perfect Teacher. I often reflect on how Mipham Rinpoche must have manifested in a wisdom body to guide His Holiness. After all, it was Mipham Rinpoche who, in that dream, urged him to teach the words of my perfect teacher. So this teaching we're studying, we should regard it as a profound treasure passed down from the lineage masters. Thanks to the words of my perfect teacher, we later generations have truly received enormous benefits. And when we reflect on all the circumstances that made this possible, it's clear why. This was because, back in 1997, His Holiness had made a vow to carry out a 4-year teaching plan. In the first year, he taught Sutra of 100 Karma Stories, and in the second year, the Way of the Bodhisattva. In the third year, he taught the general commentary on Vajrayana, which is the great net of magical display, and in the fourth year, the heart essence of the Guru. After completing the entire 4-year teaching, he then taught the Sutra on the Wise and Foolish and the Words of My Perfect Teacher. It was truly thorough. I often sit alone in my room, thinking about all that Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche taught throughout his entire life, especially the teachings of his later years. For us, this is a very auspicious dependent arising. I hope that everyone will take the teaching seriously this time. I also made a vow at that time. I vowed to teach it 1,000 times or 10,000 times, which should be fulfilled this time. Even if I alone haven't taught it 1,000 times, each of you has heard it at least once. And from the perspective of Buddhist reasoning, that's enough. My vow can be said to have been fulfilled. If we look at it from the perspective of your hearing, it must have been over 1,000 or 10,000 times. To recap, We were talking about the Lotus Gardens play, which actually consists of many profound teachings, and also explains stories of bees trapped and dying in a flower. Now, let's continue to study the tongue consciousness, because their sense of taste is lured by its flavor. Fish are caught with bait. Some beings are particularly attached to certain tastes and flavors. The enjoyment of a fine meal with all its delicacies. Nowadays, people in the world are especially drawn to exotic delicacies. In fact, this is also the reason why fish are caught with bait. It's because they're lured by their craving for food. Similarly, many people in cities nowadays are especially greedy for food. They go to restaurants saying, "This is tasty, that's tasty." When they look at any living being, they think, "Oh, this might be tasty." As soon as they see any food, they wonder how fresh it is, how tasty it is. Being attached in this way leads to terrifying karmic consequences. In the end, such people might also be reborn as fish themselves and end up in someone else's mouth. While being human, we ate many aquatic animals and land animals. In this way, with these kinds of karma, we might end up in someone else's boiling pot in a future life. This is due to greed for food. So during the process of hearing and practicing the Dharma, we shouldn't be craving for food. Now, the next example concerns the body consciousness. Elephants get trapped in swamps because they crave the cool, soothing feeling of mud against their skin. As for the body, some people are particularly fond of things that are soft and comfortable, or particularly pleasing to touch. It's just like an elephant on a scorching day. In search of some physical comfort, it rushes into a muddy swamp, only to get stuck and ultimately die there. Nowadays, people are occupied with thoughts on how soft and comfortable their clothes are, or how relaxed their body feels after a massage. Another example is the black mud bath. In Sichuan, even the buses carry advertisements for soothing black mud baths. Many people's bodies are entirely covered in mud. In Tibetan areas, black mud baths are free because there's plenty of soil. But nowadays, as long as the advertisement is successful, people believe it's great. As long as their bodies feel enjoyable, people pay great attention to tactile sensations. At times, it seems that sentient beings are indeed in an unfortunate state. If you don't create negative karma, then seeking some comfort for your body isn't particularly harmful. But during this process, you might commit a lot of negative karma related to lust or other terrible deeds. So if you're attached to such tactile sensations, you'll create karma. Also, in the Treasury of Pith Instructions, it says the mind is misled by attachment, like a camel mourning its lost calf. For instance, if your mind is attached to lust or greedy for wealth, you may lose the most beloved objects in your next life, just like a camel that loses its calf, clinging to that loss, pining endlessly in grief. So such objects actually bring us terrible consequences. Therefore, regarding the objects of the six senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, we should try our best to abandon these attachments and not cling to them. When you find yourself attached, you should realize, oh, I shouldn't be overly attached right now. Otherwise, this will become a cause for falling into lower realms. You should control your mind with mindfulness and vigilance. There was a professor who, during a lecture, mentioned that in Chinese Buddhism, many monks wear straw sandals. In these sandals, the 5 toes in the front are exposed, as is the heel at the back. This, she said, symbolizes the renunciation of the 6 sensory desires. If that's the case, then what about many Indian girls, whose feet are almost entirely bare, not just the toes and heels, but practically everything? Perhaps that symbolizes renouncing all sensory objects. But I'm not sure whether this is recorded in the scriptures. I can't claim to be an authoritative expert on Chinese Buddhism, and I'm also unsure whether their interpretation is correct. Many people in China now share this belief. Anyhow, it's true that monks are called to renounce attachments to forms, sounds, smells, and tastes. Of course, we live in the desire realm. Before reaching the stage of enlightenment, it's very hard not to cling to anything at all, to have no desire for food, to abandon every sensory object. That level of renunciation is extremely difficult. But at the very least, when we're practicing or listening to teachings, we shouldn't simultaneously cling to the 5 sensory desires and seek Dharma, as this is unrealistic. When listening to teachings, we should set aside all worldly attachments to the 5 desires and 6 sensory objects. After setting them aside, you can then focus entirely on hearing the teachings. This will be very effective, so everyone must take note. In the same way, whenever you're listening to the Dharma, teaching it, meditating, or doing any kind of practice, guard your mind carefully. Don't chase after memories of the past. Don't entertain fantasies about the future. And don't let your present thoughts wander to things around you. The most severe issue is when practicing, teaching, or listening to teachings. Memories of various past experiences surface in your mind. Don't let it happen. At that very moment, whether we're teaching or listening, thoughts of desire, anger, and ignorance, along with all sorts of discriminating thoughts and plans for the future, disrupt our mental stream at the same time. This is what we call the thoughts of the 3 times. That's to say, thoughts about past, present, and future. All 3 types should be eliminated when teaching or listening to the Dharma. I think it may be easier to eliminate them while teaching. Because when teaching, if your mind is wandering off to the past or the future rather than staying with the Dharma, unless you're referencing certain cases or your own experiences, it might be difficult to come up with anything relevant. And even if you do, you might not be able to articulate it clearly. But when listening to teachings, you must be particularly cautious. If you don't pay attention, there's a saying in Tibet, physically in the temple, but mentally in the city. This phrase is used as a sarcastic remark against some phony monks, where the body is bound to the temple, listening to the sutra, but the mind has wandered miles away to the city, planning various improper activities. In addition, some of us, while listening to Dharma teachings, simultaneously think about what they'll do in the future, and their minds start making all kinds of plans. This has grave negative impacts on how well you receive the teachings. For instance, after finishing the Dzogchen preliminaries, there are a few minutes of meditation instructions. During this meditation, those who are less disciplined can't even control their minds for just a few minutes. They produce one discriminating thought after another and become very disappointed in themselves. If you train your mind and practice regularly, it won't be so difficult to quiet and focus your mind. Because what we're doing isn't exactly peaceful abiding meditation. In peaceful abiding meditation, even subtle discriminating thoughts can be harmful and have to be eliminated. What we're doing now is analytical meditation. In analytical meditation, for example, if you're reflecting on how precious and rare this human life is, then you simply need to keep your mind focused on that topic. As soon as discursive thoughts arise, bring your mind back with mindfulness and vigilantly keep your mind focused on the topic of meditation. This isn't too difficult, but if you have never observed your own mind before, it may be very challenging. It's like some children who have never been to school. They're very naughty, running around on their own freely, and no one can discipline them. However, it will be a different story if they receive real guidance from a teacher at school. When they're slightly badly behaved, they'll quickly be disciplined. Similarly, our minds truly need cultivation. In the beginning, without practice, you may find yourself frustrated. You can't even keep the mind still for a few minutes, let alone a day, a month, or years. For many people who don't practice, their minds can be unruly. That's why they might say, "Alas, practice is too difficult. I've been practicing for a month, and my mind is still unsettled." Training the mind isn't that easy. Since beginningless time, our discursive thoughts have been like wild elephants. How could you expect them to calm down in just 1 or 2 days? It isn't that easy. So we should try every possible means to tame our mind. Next, It's said that when practicing any dharma, it's best not to have thoughts about the past, present, or future. If such thoughts do arise, we should try to turn them toward virtuous dharma. Here is how Togme Zangpo expressed this. He was teaching the people of his village, whom he affectionately called the Maniwas. Your past joys and sorrows are like ripples on water. No trace of them remains. Don't run after them. But should they come to mind, reflect on how success and failure come and go. Is there anything you can trust besides Dharma? Maniwa? That's the verse. Now what does it mean? He is saying that our past experiences of suffering and joy have already passed. This is similar to ripples in water. Upon appearance, they immediately disappear, leaving no trace. There's no need to keep dwelling on it. Some lay people and monastics like to say, in the past this was how I had romantic relationship. Or, this was how I used to fight in battles, etc. It's inappropriate to boast about these things. Nowadays, people especially like to boast about the past. As they tell their stories, they may feel nostalgic and start to cry, feeling both sad and happy at the same time, and experience a roller coaster of emotions. It's like descending into madness. This is unnecessary. As the Venerable Longchenpa once taught, everything before yesterday has already passed. There's no need to dwell on any of it. It's just like ripples fading on the surface of water. Everything has already disappeared without a trace, so there's no need to let memories linger. But should they still arise in your thoughts, redirect them. Turn those thoughts toward the Dharma instead. For instance, the people gathered in the past. Where have they ended up now? Those who were wealthy before may have ended up in poverty, and those who were once short of food or clothing may have become very wealthy. Such is the process of rise and fall. Or in the past our family was united, but now everyone has dispersed. All experience in the past has gone, upon which you can contemplate the entire concept of impermanence. You see, redirecting thoughts in this way indeed brings great benefits to your Dharma practice. Because after such contemplation you'll realize that apart from the Dharma, there's nothing else trustworthy or reliable. Just as the Sutra of Instructions to the King says, for those facing death, the Dharma is their refuge and protector. So, apart from the Dharma, there's nothing else. Now, Maniwa at the end of the verse refers to the people of a particular village. Togme Zangpo, who was the author of the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva, was addressing the people of that village by name, much like how we today might say Northeasterners or Southerners. I have translated his biography and also introduced him when teaching the way of the Bodhisattva. The verse we just read was his teaching to those people. He was addressing to them directly by name. Maniwa is colloquial. He taught the Maniwas that there's no need to dwell on all past events. Whether we're practicing the Dharma or listening to teachings, some people constantly think about the past and attach to it. It's truly unnecessary. Talking about the past is useless. If you must talk about it, combine it with the contemplation of impermanence. In this way, it will have some significance for your practice. At that moment, you realize that apart from the Dharma, in the entire world, there's nothing trustworthy or reliable. This is the teaching on refraining from attachment to thoughts on the past. Your future projects and plans are like fishnets cast in a dry riverbed. They'll never bring what you want. Limit your desires and aspirations. But should they come to mind, think how uncertain it is when you'll die. Have you got time for anything other than Dharma? Maniwa. Constantly plotting and planning for the future are also futile. It's like casting a fish net in a dry field, then sitting there waiting for fish to appear. You imagine that when they come, you'll catch them all at once, scoop them up, and prepare a great feast. That's nothing but a daydream, completely unrealistic. But nowadays, many people have various unrealistic longings or desires for the future. Unrealistic hopes like this are all unnecessary. In Tibet, we have a saying, where there's hope, despair is never far behind. This is actually very true. For example, when we hope to become wealthy or somebody, we don't even realize there's much despair encircling it. People often think to themselves, this year, I should do this or achieve that. And so the cycle of planning goes on and on. Last year, many business people thought, I'll definitely get rich by trading stocks and dealing in real estate. At that time, they planned, when I have so much money, I can do this or that. They didn't expect that an international financial crisis or some other upheaval would sweep right into their lives. In the end, everything turned into a fantasy which was later shattered. Cases like this are numerous, so there's no need for all these impossible dreams about the future. If you have to think about the future, then try to contemplate the uncertainty of the time of death. Surely, all sentient beings will die. Think about what happens at death, and contemplate the impermanence of life and uncertainty of time of death. Then we realize that there's no time or space for unwholesome activities. Let the people of Maniwa know, oh, if I think about impermanence, then I can no longer afford to be careless, distracted, or lazy. There's no time for unwholesome actions in such a short life. Contemplating when we'll leave this world gives us a strong sense of urgency. This is the teaching on thoughts about the future. As for the thoughts on the present, the verse says, your present work is like a job in a dream. Since all such effort is pointless, cast it aside. Consider even your honest earnings without any attachment. Activities are without essence, Maniwa. We shouldn't be overly attached to the various trivial and temporary matters of the present moment either. Instead, treat them as dreams or illusions, appearing but without substance. Even if you're diligent in all these, they truly have no real significance. So, you should give up some of your attachments. For example, to eating, walking, talking, even sleeping and other actions. We shall not be too attached. If you do, afflictions will follow. Nowadays, many people don't understand why everything is like a dream or an illusion. Thus, they regard everything as substantial. Once you become attached, you create all sorts of karma. So we should eat and move through daily life with a spirit of non-attachment, seeing all things as empty, like a dream, like an illusion. It's only with these insights that you can realize that all mundane actions have no real significance. The only meaningful pursuit is practicing the Dharma. Anything else that's unwholesome must be abandoned. Especially harmful actions that negatively affect your future lives should be discarded. You should understand this principle. Between meditation sessions, learn to control in this way all thoughts arising from the three poisons: desire, aversion, and ignorance. Here, three poisons can also be interpreted as 3 times: past, present, future. I read a commentary on the preliminaries by a master known as Yukok Lama, a revered Tibetan teacher, and he used the term 3 times rather than 3 poisons. That interpretation is easier to explain here, as it summarizes thoughts on the past, present, and future discussed earlier. In Tibetan, the terms for 3 poisons and 3 times differ by only a single syllable, which is why there's a textual ambiguity here. Between meditation sessions, learn to control in this way all thoughts arising from the 3 times, until all thoughts and perceptions arise as the Dharmakaya. This is crucial, remember it whenever you need it. Don't give rein to deluded thoughts. Maniwa, from the reasoning above, we can conclude that we must subdue all discursive thoughts on the future, past, and present. This is crucial. During our practice sessions, first and foremost, don't think about what happened in the past. If you do, tell yourself, what's the use of recalling the past? Also, don't dwell on the present by asking, what am I doing now? Or, what do I need to do now? Otherwise, you might not even be able to sleep at night. And don't focus on the future. If you have to, then only think about positive and virtuous activities and not anything else. But many of us ordinary beings rarely plan virtuous actions for the future. Most of our thoughts about the future are about unwholesome plans. So these discursive thoughts about the 3 times past, present, and future, are simply the content of an unawakened mind. They arise because the nature of reality hasn't yet fully manifested for us. Generally, once you attain realization, all objects of discursive thoughts become the display of the Dharmakaya, ultimate reality. Until you reach such a state, it's best not to indulge in them. This is crucial, remembering it whenever you need it. We just discussed the way of managing the discursive thoughts about the 3 times, until all appearances arise as the Dharmakaya, ultimate reality, whenever these thoughts resurface. This method of counteracting them remains absolutely essential. Don't let it slip and don't abandon this method. For us ordinary beings, if we abandon this method, our practice will definitely not succeed. So never give rein to deluded thoughts. Otherwise, both your practice and study of the Dharma will fail. It's also said, don't daydream about the future. If you do, you'll end up like the father of Chandrakirti, whose name means glory of the moon. Don't daydream about the future. If you do, you'll end up just like that, like the father of Chandrakirti. Here in the verse, the Chandrakirti isn't the same as the author of Entering the Middle Way. Chandrakirti, but another famous figure. This story is so well known in Tibet that it's considered common knowledge known by everyone. It also has a kind of ironic implication for practitioners. Quite a profound teaching within the story. The story goes like this. A long time ago, a poor man came across a large pile of barley. He stored the barley in a big sack, tied the bag to the beam, and then he lay down right beneath the bag. Generally, a sack of barley weighs about 100 to 200 pounds. They're particularly large and heavy, and typically packed in a leather sack. Then he got worried, just as some people do nowadays, for example, worried that mice might eat his grain, so he hung it up to the beam. You also shouldn't sleep underneath it, as it's a big hazard. And then he started to daydream. This barley is going to make me really rich, he imagined. I'll use this sack as seed to grow even more barley. Then I'll harvest it, sell it, and make a great fortune. Once I'm rich, I'll get myself a wife. She's bound to have a boy, a lovely kid for sure. At that time, I would definitely have to name the child. Naming is my responsibility, he thought to himself. The name must be good, as the child is so lovely. What shall I call him? Just then, the moon rose over the eastern mountain. He supposed, this is a very good omen, very auspicious. And he decided to call his son Chandrakirti, meaning glory of the moon. He was probably a Tibetan or Indian, of which I'm not sure. In India, names ending in dash kirti, meaning glory or fame, are very common, Chandrakirti, Dharmakirti, and so on. He was just about to name the child Chandrakirti. However, all this time that he indulged in fantasizing about the future, a rat had been gnawing away at the rope that was holding up the sack. The rope suddenly snapped, and the sack fell on the man, and he was killed. How sad. As he was dreaming about his plans for the future, he left this world. I think I've told this story before, but there are different versions of it. There's a folk version of a similar story. It goes like this. The father of Chandrakirti acquired a lot of barley and was very happy. He didn't have a house, so he carried a large bag of barley, climbing and trekking over mountains. One night he stayed on a mountain peak. On the mountain peak, he was very happy, extremely glad. He thought, how wonderful that now I have managed to gather so much barley. He was sleeping beside the barley that night. Or specifically, the bag of barley was placed beside his feet. Actually, the mountain he stayed on was quite steep, and he kept planning for the future all night long, in the same way as in the previous story. He kept imagining, now that I have barley, I'll get married and have children. What should I call this child? And it occurred to him that maybe he should name the child Chandrakirti. As he was uttering the words, I shall name the child Chandrakirti. The moon rose from the eastern mountain and shed moonlight over him. At that moment he was particularly happy and thought, look, as soon as I came up with the name Chandrakirti, the moonlight appears, so surely everything will be successful. In great happiness, he stretched out his feet, kicking the bag of barley down the mountain into the lake below. It caused him so much sadness that eventually he jumped into the lake himself and died. The imaginary child Chandrakirti never came into the world, but the father had already left him. And here's yet another version of this same theme, this time from the Jiangnan region of China. I've told it before. There was a wanderer, a beggar, who begged everywhere and lived in great suffering. Later, before he crossed a river, he used all the money he had to buy a lottery ticket. Then he thought to himself, if I win the lottery, what will I do with the money? He imagined, first I'll buy a pair of expensive gold-framed glasses. Then I'll stay in a 5-star hotel, and so on. Later, his lottery ticket really hit the jackpot. He was thrilled and thought, my dream has finally come true. He was beyond happiness. As a beggar, he originally carried a dog-expelling stick, a stick that beggars carried to fend off dogs, since his clothes were all tattered with no pockets. He tucked the lottery ticket into a crevice in the dog-expelling stick, and then forgot about it. Later, when he heard he had won, he was overjoyed. He then went to a bridge, on which he was so upbeat that he burst out shouting, from now on, I will throw away all my beggar's tools. And then he threw the stick far into the rolling river. As he looked, he realized that the lottery ticket was still in the stick. His joy instantly turned to utter despair. He jumped into the river himself and left this world. And there are many similar anecdotes. I hope that practitioners understand that fantasizing about the future is indeed unnecessary. As I just mentioned, behind hope hides much despair. Plans change quicker than expected, and in a short time, the dreams you originally had can quickly shatter, and when that happens, it's particularly heartbreaking. Nowadays, many people contemplate about, this is how I should be making money. Once I have the money, I can buy a house and a car, etc. At that time, they start imagining how things will turn out. Even though these future events haven't yet occurred, some families begin to argue about what may or may not happen. Stories like this also happen in Tibet. And sometimes this kind of foolish fantasizing doesn't just harm oneself, it destroys others too, as this Tibetan story shows. There was a family with a cute child. The child was rather naughty, but the husband had many deluded thoughts. He said, now even though our family is poor, I'll find a way to make some money. Once I have the money, I'll buy a mare. Then a very cute pony will be born for sure. At that time he told his child, when the pony is born, you must not hurt it. You're very mischievous, so you must not harm the pony. But the child said, I won't when the time comes. I want to ride the pony. The father was very upset and said, I just told you, didn't I? You can't harm it. Then he struck the child with a stick. Tragically, the child died on the spot. It was really not worth it. There are many unrealistic things which are bound to fail, yet people argue over them endlessly. This happens quite often. As practitioners, we should spend less time deluding ourselves with unrealistic future thoughts. We should focus on the present moment and rely on the Dharma to act correctly and in accordance with the teachings. Only in this way will your Dharma practice be perfected and successful. Otherwise, even well-intentioned people can fall into unrealistic fantasy. If those plans involve virtuous deeds, that's understandable. There was once a monk who often thought, I should become a great Dharma master in the future. When I'm a great Dharma master, I'll definitely build a temple. But this temple must be far away in the east, in a place with good terrain and environment. At that time, his mind just kept dreaming about how the great Buddha hall would be built, how its glazed tiles would shimmer, and so on. Of course, one is free to enjoy such imaginings. But sometimes we really have far too many thoughts about the future, things that may never come to pass. and there's simply no need to dwell on them. Similarly, we should let go of the past, especially unwholesome experiences. There's no need to discuss them with others, and no need to replay them in our own minds. When practicing the Dharma, what matters most is transforming the present mind onto the path and engaging in virtuous action. When listening to the Dharma, we must turn the present mind to the Dharma. Just as the great masters of the past have taught, we must constantly observe our minds. When our minds keep producing discursiveness and afflictions, use mindfulness and vigilance to tame them, and then your practice will be successful. The same goes for listening to the Dharma. Therefore, as Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche mentioned before, as practitioners, we can have plans for future Dharma practices. For example, after I finish listening to this Dharma here, I can listen to the next one. Or after I finish practicing the preliminaries, I'll recite such and such scriptures. Such plans are still necessary, but other unwholesome ones are indeed unnecessary. Once I thought, during this month, I'll just be staying at home. But it turned out to be impossible, as I had fallen ill, or I had to leave to go somewhere. Suddenly, some kind of condition arose that caused the wind of karma to blow me elsewhere. Another time I thought, I should go out next month. I absolutely must take care of something. After planning everything out in my mind, things turned out very differently. How our future plans pan out doesn't align entirely with our wishes. So, there's no need to plan too much. As some Dharma friends like to say, oh well, just go with the flow. And we'll talk about it when the time comes. Maybe that's a better approach. Just talk about it when the time comes. Don't even try to decide now what's going to happen in 2 months. Some layperson once said to me, in 10 years, I'll definitely become a monk in your presence. Don't even mention 10 years. It's really hard to say whether something can be decided even 10 months from now. But some people just don't understand that in 10 years you might have turned into ashes, and I might have turned into ashes as well. It's hard to say. Complex and deluded thoughts about the past and the future are fundamentally untrustworthy. This is indeed a very profound teaching. Many of our past thoughts, after much reflection, have proven to be unreliable, and the same is true for future planning. Constantly mapping out all the possibilities ahead will hinder both your practice and your listening. Some people suddenly find themselves swept up in worry, anxious about all kinds of things that might happen next year. They lose sleep at night, anxious during the day. Some people are constantly distracted by thinking. These are just causes of chaos and distraction in their own minds. Therefore, we must make every effort to eradicate discursive thoughts. We should listen to the Dharma with awareness, mindfulness, and conscientiousness. If your mind wanders outward, these three, awareness, mindfulness, and conscientiousness, are your sentinels. Use them to bring the mind back. Guide your mind towards virtuous practices, so that you can listen to the teachings properly. These are indeed vital instructions for hearing the Dharma. If you don't understand this, it may appear on the surface that you're in the process of listening to the Dharma, but in reality, you gain nothing from it. Ordinary people often fall into these kinds of bad habits. Think of it this way. A new device comes with a manual. Once you read the manual, you know how to use it. Listening to the Dharma is the same. At the very beginning, the rules of listening to the Dharma are very crucial. Whether it concerns your intention, behavior, or adjustment, it's essential that we understand these instructions. By adjusting in this way, the Dharma teachings can all be taken into your heart, so everyone should pay attention to this. All right, we'll end today's teaching here.
Sonam dei tamse thobaya tonne de jana pase jirgana jirano chupai chupun sonen dra
Bandara Badna Sadarda Bandara Badna Sada Bandara Badna Sadarda